Isn't it time we stopped hating Phil Collins?
For a pop legend who topped charts, sold out stadiums, and even played both sides of Live Aid, Phil Collins has taken more punches than most. Over the years, he became an unlikely punching bag, mocked by critics, dismissed by rock purists, and even insulted by artists half his age. As Collins himself once quipped, "I think it became fashionable to hate me. I get it. I wasn't cool, but it wasn't always a one-way street." Collins, too, had his own enemies, and he didn't hold back. From awkward snubs by his childhood heroes to grunge icons who called for his head, these are the pivotal moments where Phil Collins drew the line, and some of the names may genuinely surprise you. Number 1. Pink Floyd. I've been Pink Floyd. I was never a big Floyd fan. Phil Collins has never pretended otherwise. Across decades of interviews, he made it clear Pink Floyd simply didn't resonate with him, especially in their early years, even recalling a marquee show where they just didn't do it for me. While Genesis was often grouped with Floyd in the burgeoning progressive rock movement, Collins consistently rejected the comparison, stating, "I was in a band that was always put in the same box as that lot, but I never felt that we actually were in the same box, but we probably were." This classic Collins tone, self-deprecating yet pointed, highlighted a fundamental clash. Pink Floyd were the moody mystics. Collins was the drummer who wanted a tune you could hum in the car. Roger Waters, however, was less subtle. In a brutal 1192 Takedown, Waters declared, "I seem to always wind up attacking poor Phil Collins. He's symptomatic of an awful lot of what's wrong with the music industry. He's pretending to be a songwriter or a rock and roller. It's an act. That's why it's unsatisfying." For Waters, Collins represented everything he despised about 1980s pop: slick production, chart-friendly melodies, and emotional shallowness, a stark contrast to Floyd's immersive sonic experiences, focused on alienation and societal critique. Collins favored emotional accessibility, songs about heartbreak and regret. Both sold millions, but one viewed the other as self-important and dour, while the other dismissed his counterpart as commercial fluff. In Collins' words, "I liked what I heard from Floyd when I came across it by accident, but I never really sit down and listen to them." This line encapsulates the dynamic. Floyd was a band you prepared for. Collins was the guy who showed up on the radio whether you wanted him or not. The tension was exacerbated by Collins taking over Genesis after Peter Gabriel, leading the band into more accessible pop territory. Waters, still immersed in concept albums, likely saw Collins as a sellout. Collins typically didn't seem to care, quipping, "Waters is a bit of a grouch, but Gilmour's a lovely, lovely guy." Despite Collins clarifying that his earlier boring comment about Floyd's music was reflective of his tastes, at the time, the slight lingered. Both found themselves in the prog rock box, a label Collins actively fought against as Genesis evolved. While the feud faded over time, becoming less active, it was never a bromance. They didn't collaborate, they didn't tour together, and they certainly didn't trade mutual respect. Next, Paul McCartney. Rock and roll has its fair share of diva clashes, but the quiet tension between Phil Collins and Paul McCartney stands out, not for its public explosion, but for its origin. One offhand joke that never truly healed. Collins, like countless others, grew up idolizing the Beatles, even landing a Blink and You'll Miss It appearance as a screaming fan in A Hard Day's Night. Years later, after forging his own legendary career, Collins found himself sharing royal stages, not as a fan, but as a peer. By 2002, Collins was a household name. So when he encountered McCartney at Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee, he approached him with genuine admiration, hoping for a signature on a first edition of The Beatles by Hunter Davies. Instead, he received a comment he'd never forget. "Oh, Heather, our little Phil's a bit of a Beatles fan." McCartney reportedly told his then-wife, To Collins, it wasn't charming, it was patronizing, a dismissive remark that stung because it minimized his own monumental achievements. He later told the Sunday Times, "I thought, you've never forgot it." Collins primarily resented the underlying attitude, claiming McCartney had a way of making people feel small. He has this thing where he makes you feel like, "I know this must be hard for you because I'm a Beatle." Collins didn't need hero worship, he simply wanted respect. Years later, after Collins detailed the incident in his memoir Not Dead Yet, McCartney reached out, but the message, according to Collins, wasn't warm. "I didn't get flowers, I got more of a let's just move on with our lives." To Collins, it wasn't enough. McCartney had missed the point, or perhaps didn't care to understand the depth of the sting. This quiet disappointment is starkly contrasted by Collins' recollection of George Harrison, who, after accidentally omitting Collins from All Things Must Pass credits, made amends with an absurd prank that ended in laughter, that felt personal, even if at Collins' expense. With McCartney, there was no shared moment, no laugh, just silence and a quote that has haunted Collins ever since. "McCartney was one of my heroes, and I wish I hadn't met him." It's not a feud built on insults or headlines. It's a quiet disappointment that never faded. A childhood idol who, in one offhand moment, revealed a side Collins never wanted to see. They'll never trade diss tracks, but in Collins' mind, that paragraph moment said it all, and he never really let it go. Third, Oasis. They're just horrible guys. The feud's origin traces back to Oasis's nascent days, as Noel Gallagher shaped the band's identity. With grunge receding after Kurt Cobain's death, Noel positioned Oasis as a raw, working-class antidote to what he called junk food music, a label he explicitly applied to mainstream pop and artists like Phil Collins. In the 2016 documentary Supersonic, Noel's mission was clear. "We're going to get rid of Phil Collins and Sting. Junk food music, McDonald's music. We've got to get in the charts and stamp them out. I want the severed head of Phil Collins in my fridge by the end of this decade. And if I haven't, I'll be a failure." Even before Definitely Maybe was released, Collins was already Noel's chosen symbol of rebellion. Over the years, Noel only doubled down, routinely calling Collins the Antichrist, and even dragging him into political commentary. Ahead of the 2005 UK general election, Noel told The Guardian, "If the Conservatives get in, Phil Collins is threatening to come back and live here, and let's face it, none of us wants that." To Noel, Collins symbolized overproduced commercialism and apparently middle-aged conservatism. For years, Collins largely avoided the back and forth, but after being repeatedly called the Antichrist, and even blamed for Oasis not reaching #1, he finally responded. "They're just horrible guys," he said in a TV interview. "They're rude and not as talented as they think they are. They keep having a go at me, which I find strange." He clarified that he didn't hate their music, only their attitudes. "They make good music if you can stomach their behavior." But by then, it was more than a spat. It was personal, and strangely iconic. Then came the moment no one expected. Phil Collins and Noel Gallagher trapped in the same Caribbean bar. As Collins recounted in his autobiography, he was vacationing in Mystique when he befriended local bar owners, joking about doing a set. He agreed, but when he arrived to perform, there they were sitting in the corner of this tiny bar. Collins recalled, "Our Noel, his wife, Johnny Depp, Kate Moss, and a Labour MP." Collins, attempting to break the ice, asked Noel to join for a jam. Gallagher refused, and his wife made a sarcastic comment about Collins' recent foray into guitar music. Collins admitted, "I retired to the bar." Feeling not a little embarrassed, Kate Moss later apologized for the awkward encounter. But as Collins began his set, Noel and his entourage got up and left. If there were any doubts about the depth of the rift, They evaporated on that island night. The bad blood even reportedly spilled into the next generation when Collins's children mistook Liam Gallagher for Noel and confronted him. By the 2010s, Noel began to slightly soften, admitting his Antichrist comment was flippant. Still, the digs persisted. Collins later addressed Noel's political attack directly, calling it a misrepresentation. "I don't care if he likes my music or not," he said. "I do care if he starts telling people I'm a wanker because of my politics. It's an opinion based on an old misunderstood." By that point, Collins was nearing retirement. His focus shifted, but he was still quietly keeping receipts. Fourth, Led Zeppelin. In rock history, some clashes are loud and chaotic, full of drugs, guitars, and headlines. Others are quieter, but somehow more bitter, lingering like a bad note played the wrong moment in front of a million people. The feud between Phil Collins and Led Zeppelin falls into the latter category. It was born out of one of the most high-profile reunions in music history, a once-in-a-lifetime show that should have been unforgettable for all the right reasons. Instead, it turned into a disaster that both sides would spend decades blaming each other for. Live Aid wasn't just another concert, it was the concert, a global event, a cause, a spectacle. Phil Collins, riding high as a solo star and Genesis member, performed at Wembley, then boarded the Concorde to Philadelphia to do it all again, this time with Led Zeppelin. But Led Zeppelin wasn't Led Zeppelin anymore. Their legendary drummer John Bonham had died in 1980, and the band broke up soon after, declaring they couldn't continue without him. For Live Aid, they reluctantly agreed to reunite for one night only, which meant they needed a drummer, or in this case two, Phil Collins and Tony Thompson from Chic. From the beginning, things were off. In his memoir, Collins admitted he thought he'd be playing just a few songs with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page under their own names, not as Led Zeppelin. He didn't know the full set list and hadn't rehearsed. His only preparation was listening to Stairway to Heaven on the Concorde. "I arrive and go to the caravans, and Robert says Jimmy Page is belligerent," Collins recalled. The warning was prescient. When Collins tried to demonstrate the drum intro to Stairway, Page scoffed. "No, it doesn't go like that." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome. Despite Collins's efforts to coordinate with Thompson and keep things simple, there was no saving the set. The performance, consisting of Rock and Roll, Whole Lotta Love, and Stairway to Heaven, was disjointed, sluggish, and painfully awkward. Collins knew it in real time. "If I could have walked off during Stairway, I would have. But imagine the headlines: Phil Collins walks out on Led Zeppelin at Live Aid. I stayed, I maimed, I played air drums just to get through it." After the show, the fallout was swift and public. Jimmy Page wasted no time throwing Collins under the bus. "We had 2 hours rehearsal, not even that. The drummer couldn't get the beginning of Rock and Roll. We were in real trouble." He described Collins as bashing away cluelessly and grinning during the performance. Even Robert Plant joined in the passive-aggressive shade, sitting next to Collins in a post-show interview and stating, "The three of us knew what we were doing, and everybody else did their very, very best," while John Paul Jones pointed directly at Collins. Collins, to put it lightly, was furious. "I got pissed off," he later admitted. "Maybe I didn't know the material as well as Jimmy wanted, but I wasn't the only problem. If you watch the video, you can see Jimmy dribbling, Robert not hitting the notes, and me. I'm just trying to get out of the way." Collins felt used, underprepared, and blamed, and he wasn't about to keep quiet. To most musicians, playing drums for Led Zeppelin, even for one night, would be a dream. For Collins, it became one of the worst experiences of his career, a mistake and a disaster he's recounted in nearly every interview since. His honesty about how bad it was has become legendary. "It wasn't amazing to be there. I have to say, they weren't very good, and I was made to feel a little uncomfortable by the dribbling Jimmy Page. He felt like a spare part." Ironically, Collins had a deep admiration for John Bonham, Zeppelin's original drummer, and considered him a major influence, acknowledging how impossible it was to fill his shoes. They should have left it alone. You can't replace Bonham with two drummers and expect it to work. The Zeppelin performance at Live Aid was so universally panned that the band refused to let it be included on the official Live Aid DVD release page. Plant and Jones ensured it was left out, as if it never happened. Of course, the internet never forgets. Bootlegs and YouTube clips of the set still circulate, and it's every bit as uncomfortable as you'd imagine. Mistimed cues, missed notes, confused glances between band members. Collins is clearly struggling, and so is everyone else. It was supposed to be a moment of rock history, a triumphant reunion. Instead, it became a lesson in what happens when ego, miscommunication, and lack of preparation collide on the world's biggest stage. In the years since, Collins has tried to move on, but the bitterness occasionally resurfaces. In interviews, he's painted a picture of a performance doomed from the start, not because of malice, but because of poor planning and misplaced expectations. Here's how it is, Collins observed. Robert on his own. Lovely bloke. Robert with Zeppelin. Something changes. A dark energy enters the room. It's like a nasty strain of alchemy. He didn't name Page directly in that quote, but he didn't have to. And while Page has expressed some regret about the reunion, it wasn't very clever. He's never fully apologized for throwing Collins under the bus. If anything, he's doubled down. Finally, Kurt Cobain. I hate what he stands for. In the early 90s, a seismic shift rumbled through the music world. The leather pants and synths of the 80s were out. Flannel shirts, angst, and distortion were in. Grunge had arrived, and at its helm stood Kurt Cobain, a disheveled punk with a sharp tongue and a deeply ingrained disdain for anything he deemed fake or corporatized, including Phil Collins. By the time Nirvana's Nevermind dropped in 1991, Collins was already a pop institution. With hits like In the Air Tonight and Another Day in Paradise, he'd transcended his Genesis progressive rock roots and become the poster boy for soft rock balladry. But to Cobain, Collins didn't just represent old music, he embodied everything that grunge was rebelling against. In a 1992 interview with Melody Maker, Cobain unleashed what would become one of his most infamous tirades against another musician. Sitting on top of the world, Nirvana had just transformed the music landscape with Smells Like Teen Spirit, yet Cobain was already disillusioned with the industry and ready to name names. "You know what I hate about rock?" he asked, before unleashing the verbal napalm. "I hate Phil Collins. All of that white male soul. I hate tie-dyed t-shirts too. I wouldn't wear a tie-dyed t-shirt unless it was dyed with the urine of Phil Collins and the blood of Jerry Garcia." It was a nuclear-level diss, one that managed to slam Collins, the Grateful Dead, and the commodification of counterculture all in one breath. For Cobain, Collins wasn't just a musician he didn't like. He was the symbol of everything fake, sanitized, and commercial. Collins was no stranger to fame. He'd sold out arenas, won Oscars, and become a household name. But to Gen X icons like Cobain, he was the epitome of dad rock, the friendly face of an industry that had lost its edge. Collins wore suits. He was clean-cut. He'd starred in Disney soundtracks and made records that were too safe for Cobain's raw sensibilities. The generational clash was inevitable. Grunge was about dismantling the myth of the rock star, not polishing it with reverb-heavy ballads. Where Collins leaned into production and emotional polish, Cobain screamed through distortion pedals with bleeding sincerity. The two might have both occupied the top of the charts at different points, but artistically they couldn't have been farther apart. To his credit, Phil Collins didn't go full Gallagher brother with his retaliation. He never dragged Cobain's name through the mud in interviews, but his 1993 solo album, Both Sides, felt like a quiet rebuttal. The record was introspective and minimalist, recorded almost entirely by Collins himself. Stripped of the big production gloss he was known for, It seemed like his attempt to prove that he too could be raw, emotional, and musically serious. But to many, the timing made it look like he was trying to stay relevant in a world Cobain had already flipped upside down. Even then, Collins still came off as the uncle of rock, as some critics dubbed him kindly. Maybe even wise, but out of sync with the times. For Cobain, hating Collins wasn't just about the music. It was about the system Collins seemed to represent. He once accused him of being a symbol of yuppie culture, a clean, safe figure whose success had been built within the system. Nirvana was trying to destroy. In Cobain's view, Collins wasn't a threat. He was the establishment. That's why his criticism went so far beyond a bad review. It wasn't, "I don't like his songs." It was, "I hate what he stands for." There was no chance for the two to reconcile. Cobain died by suicide in 1994, just as the grunge movement was beginning to be absorbed and arguably diluted by the mainstream. Collins continued to make music, though with diminishing critical reception, and eventually moved into semi-retirement. Years later, Collins reflected on the grunge era with a mix of respect and distance. He praised Nirvana's influence on music and didn't return Cobain's personal vitriol. But make no mistake, he knew how the younger generation saw him. In one interview, he quipped, "I think it became fashionable to hate me. I get it. I wasn't cool." Turns out Phil Collins wasn't just the guy behind emotional ballads and iconic drum fills. He was also quietly keeping receipts behind the scenes. He had opinions, strong ones, and he didn't hesitate to call out the stars he thought were arrogant, overrated, or just plain rude. But what do you think? Was Phil right to speak his mind? Or did some of these grudges go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you didn't expect that one name on the list. And share this video with your favorite music geek. We've got plenty more where this came from, so make sure to subscribe before the next feud drops.